So hello again. My name is Matthew Druckenmiller. I am a research scientist with the National Snow and Ice Data Center at the University of Colorado Boulder, where I live and work on the lands of the Arapaho, Ute, and Cheyenne peoples. And I'm joined in this presentation by my colleagues Andrey Petrov and April Melvin. So I will turn it to them here briefly to also introduce themselves. Andrey?
All right, thank you. My name is Andrey Petrov. I'm a professor of geography and director of the Arctic Center at the University of Northern Iowa. And I serve as alternate delegate to our International Arctic Science Committee for the United States, and of course involved in the ICARP process. And I live and work in Iowa on the lands of Meskwaki people.
Hi, everyone. I'm April Melvin. I'm the staff lead for the Polar Research Board at the National Academy of Sciences. The Polar Research Board serves as the U.S. National Committee to IASC, and I'm coming to you today from Washington, D.C. On the lands of the Nacotchtank and Piscataway peoples.
Great. Thank you, Andrey and April. So the focus of this presentation today, this webinar, is to provide an update on the 4th International Conference for Arctic Research Planning, the ICARP IV process. And by doing so, we will also be providing a brief update on Arctic Science Summit Week 2025, which will be held in Boulder, Colorado, at the University of Colorado next year in March 2025. And I should have pointed out during my introduction that I serve as the lead delegate to the International Arctic Science Committee on behalf of the Polar Research Board, which is how I've become involved in the 4th International Conference for Arctic Research Planning. So I wanted to start by acknowledging and just saying a few words about the International Arctic Science Committee, IASC. IASC is the organization responsible for implementing the International Conference for Arctic Research Planning, the ICARP. IASC is a non-governmental international scientific organization that was founded in 1990. It currently has 24 member nations involved, and that includes all 8 of the Arctic states. It promotes and facilitates cooperation in all aspects of Arctic research, in all countries engaged in Arctic research, and in all areas of the Arctic. And it does so by supporting science development and advice through workshops, long-term planning, assessments, and also programs. And the ICARP is a key part of that mission. In fact, it's within IASC's founding articles that ICARP is identified. So IASC is mandated to conduct a decadal scale Arctic research planning process every 10 years to discuss the state of Arctic science and the place the Arctic occupies in global affairs and systems. And it's meant to be a very bottom-up process that engages not only Arctic researchers, but policy and decision makers, Indigenous peoples, Arctic residents, and other interested parties from around the world. So as mentioned, this is the 4th ICARP that's ongoing. The first ICARP was held in Hanover, US in 1995. The second was in Copenhagen, Denmark in 2005. And that ICARP in particular was really important in the lead up to the last International Polar Year, which took place in 2007, 2008. It resulted in 12 science plans and various international projects that fed directly into the IPY. And then the last ICARP was held, ICARP III, was held in Taioma, Japan in 2015. And that ICARP provided a framework to develop cross-cutting and interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary initiatives that have been very instrumental in shaping the work of IASC and its partners in recent years. Much of the work of IASC is done through its 5 disciplinary working groups, and ICARP III has been really critical in creating that structure and mission for those IASC working groups. ICARP III identified 3 main priority areas. The first being the role of the Arctic in the global system. The second, observing and predicting future climate dynamics and ecosystem responses. And the third, understanding the vulnerability and resilience of Arctic environments and societies and supporting sustainable development. I wanted to show this again to emphasize that this really has been the foundation for IASC's work since about 2005, 2016. And I also want to point out that all of the past ICARP reports for 1, 2, and 3 are on the current ICARP website. And I don't have that listed here, but we'll drop that in the chat here in a moment. And we also have that website on various slides here coming up. As we've been discussing ICARP IV over the last couple of years, it's come up several times in very important ways with the question of what has been the impact of the past ICARPs. And unfortunately, that has not been something that IASC has done over the years. They've never done a thorough kind of assessment of the impact of the ICARP process. And so IASC this past winter has initiated this initial assessment of the impact and the outcomes of those past 3 ICARPs that I mentioned. This is an assessment that's currently ongoing. It's being led by Jenny Baseman, who many of you may know. She is working as a consultant to IASC. She's helped to develop a survey that everyone is invited to fill out, although it's really focused on people who were involved in some way in the past ICARPs or benefited in some ways from those past ICARPs. The goal was to have that initial assessment done in time for ASSW 2024, which just took place last month in Edinburgh. But it's been a challenge in getting enough responses. So the survey is still open if you would like to fill that out. And additionally, I know Jenny is also interested in hearing from people directly. So if a survey doesn't work for you, there's also the opportunity to contact Jenny and have a conversation with her. Again, the goal is to identify the impact and the outcomes of the past ICARPs, but really the purpose is also looking forward to ensure that this next ICARP 4, is conducted in a way that will have future impact, and also that there are new mechanisms created that allow us years from now to be able to look back and really see what the value of ICARP has been. So ICARP 4, it can be a bit confusing because conference is in the name, but we've been regularly explaining this as a multi-year process with 5 separate phases. The first phase in 2022 was really just to create the foundation and the guiding plans for ICARP 4. Second year in 2023 was when we sought some foundational community input through a number of workshops, town halls, and some surveys. And then in 2024, our current year, is where we're really working to define research priorities. And that's primarily done through a set of 7 research priority teams, which Andrey will speak to in more detail here in a moment. Next year, 2025, is the phase in which the draft priorities will be shared and that there'll be a period of consultation. And then the last phase will be finalizing the plans and beginning to implement those. So again, it's a multi-year process with the goals of identifying the most urgent knowledge gaps in Arctic research priorities and needs for the next decade, and to develop an implementation vision. And I think that second point, the need for an implementation vision, is something that was not maybe as thoroughly done in past ICARPs. And so we're hoping to adjust and really create outcomes that are usable and implementable across the international Arctic research community. And then lastly, I wanted to point out that ICARP 4 is really seen also as a primary tool for planning and shaping the upcoming 5th International Polar Year, which is slated for 2032-33. And again, we have a couple slides on that to share a bit more detail. So there are various ways in which individuals or organizations have been contributing and can continue to contribute to ICARP 4. And those are detailed on this website here, which is the main ICARP 4 website. First, current activities and future activities can seek endorsement from ICARP 4, which is a very simple, streamlined process. And what it really does is create a connection between ICARP 4 and projects so that there is a reporting mechanism so that the outcomes of those other activities can feed into the ICARP IV process. There is links on this website for submitting resources that the ICARP IV International Steering Committee can review, and also the research priority teams. Again, Andrey will speak in more detail about those teams here in a moment. So as I mentioned, ICARP is really meant to be a bottom-up process. So reports that have been created, in terms of research priorities, either at the local, regional, national, or international scale, can be provided to the ICARP IV process to inform those future plans. There's also an online survey. There is the opportunity to participate in various ICARP IV events. For example, there was a number of ICARP IV events at ASSW 2024 that happened in Edinburgh, Scotland last month. But the main way to engage in the ICARP IV process will be at the ICARP IV Summit, which is slated to take place during Arctic Science Summit Week 2025 in Boulder, Colorado next March. And there will also be the opportunity to submit short statements. This is a mechanism that I don't believe is yet on the website, but we're envisioning having a process similar to the Arctic Observing Summit, where anyone can submit a short written statement to inform ICARP IV. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Andrey to talk about the research priority teams.
Yes, and you are in control of slides, right, man?
That's correct.
Yeah, so as Matthew just mentioned, the International Steering Committee for ICARP established the 7 research priority teams. As you can see, the 3 of the top ones are directly kind of taken from the ICARP 3 recommendations. So these are 3 areas: the role of the Arctic in the global system, observing, reconstructing, and predicting future climate dynamics and responses, and understanding vulnerability and resilience of environments and societies, and supporting sustainable development. They're all coming from the formulations made by ICARP 3, which we thought was kind of natural progression, so that we start from those. And there are 4 other topics for which the RPTs were formed, which include scientific cooperation and diplomacy, co-production indigenous-led methodologies, preparing present and future generations through education, outreach, communication, capacity building, networking, and technology, infrastructure, and logistics. So these are the other 4 topics. Now, the definitions of even the titles of these groups are a little bit changing as the groups are meeting right now. So that's, but sort of these are the base beginning kind of formulations that were proposed and were implemented by the International Steering Committee. So each of these RPTs has been formed now. It was a process by which there were applications solicited in the fall, and then the review process took place, and that there was about 200 applications, I think, from a variety of scholars across all 24 members of IASC, but also across other jurisdictions. So the International Steering Committee reviewed those, and there were decisions made, and most of those individuals who were interested and qualified ended up on some of the RPTs. About, I would say, 20% of the RPTs members are Indigenous scholars and knowledge holders, so that's a positive outcome of the process. And most of them have Indigenous co-chairs as well. So each of the groups have 1, 2, or 3, or 4 co-chairs. I think 4 is the maximum and 2 is the minimum, I think. It's a lot of workload, so that's why that's shared. The number of members varies, I would say, in 20 to 30 range. So these groups are now meeting, and I guess I could probably go to the next slide. So they were formed in 2023, and officially first in-person meeting was taking place in Arctic Science Summit Week just last month, right in March. And the prior to that, some of the RPTs have met virtually. So their charge is to work with a variety of things, variety of sources, their own creation, right? Some that the RPTs develop themselves, but also what materials through the mechanisms that Matt describes, would come there to their attention to develop those products that that would be most useful for identifying the priorities in those areas that our RPTs are designated for. So the work is conceived as a process that will last for 2 years, essentially, so through 2026. Again, it's started from the pre-ASSW workshops and then in-person meetings at the ASSW, and then it would continue through the summer. In the fall, in October 2024, it will be joint co-chairs workshop in Akureyri, Iceland, where some of the intermediary results or preliminary results would be discussed, and maybe more certainty about what particular formats or outputs each of the RPTs would be producing. And then, of course, in 2025 at the ICARP IV Summit, which will take place in Boulder, Colorado in March of 2025, these RPTs are expected to present their sort of preliminary but yet ready for discussion frameworks for the priorities that would be further discussed at the meeting, but also past the meeting as we go in 2025, and finalized as ICARP 4 products in late 2025, early 2026, to also develop the implementation mechanisms that Matt also mentioned. So that is a lengthy process along which, again, these teams are working together, but also accepting all kinds of inputs via the mechanisms that that ICARP process has to inform them on their priority setting processes and decisions. So next slide. Of course, the key role in this process is the ICARP IV Summit, which is also Arctic Science Summit Week of 2025 in Boulder, Colorado. As I said, there would not be a final products from RPTs at that meeting, but that would be an opportunity to present to the wider audience what RPTs have been working on, what their preliminary products are, and of course engage all kinds of Arctic communities in that discussion to make sure that this consulting is continuing and then leads to the final product at the end of that year or early 2026. Next slide. So now I think we turn to this summit. So ICARP IV Summit, which is also Arctic Science Summit Week, is in planning stages now. As many of you know, Arctic Science Summit Weeks take place every year. That's run by International Arctic Science Committee. So in this context, the Arctic Science Summit Week 2025 is going under the auspice of the ICARP IV process. So this is kind of a joint event, but it's really led by ICARP IV process. And the thematic content of Arctic Science Summit will be driven by ICARP IV process. So in that, we have several important entities that are steering the way in which ICARP process and the summit in 2025 are being organized. So first of all, there's an international steering committee that is overseeing the entire ICARP IV process between 22 and 26, right? And I'll say a few words later about who in that committee. It's been established in 2022 and really is designed to guide the overall work. It's working closely with the research priority teams to guide what they're doing, to receive feedback, and all this important functions. Then for within the United States, because the United States is the host of the ICARP IV Summit and Arctic Science Summit in 2025, there is also a local organizing committee that is focused on developing agenda for the meeting in Boulder, organizing side meetings, public events, and other things, right? Doing things locally with logistics and fundraising. And of course, again, it is the main host of the ICARP IV Summit in 2025. In addition to that, in the United States, there is a national steering group, which provides input on meeting plans and agenda for the summit, but also for the process. Advice on the products of outcomes that would be most useful for the U.S. research community or other U.S. constituents, and promotes and engages U.S. partner organizations into the process, including IARPC and other organizations that I'm sure are present in the audience. So these are the three important entities that exist to steer the process and the summit. Next slide. So just a little bit in detail. So the International Steering Committee, as I said, is the committee that oversees the entire ICARP IV process and will likely be the source of the final products that come through the research priority themes and through the ICARP IV Summit, right? The International Steering Committee consists of 26, represent 26 participating organizations. It's co-chaired by Henry Burgess, who is the IASC president at this time, and then also co-chaired by Daley Sambodoro, who is the past chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and of course also works at the University of Alaska Anchorage. He's a prominent Indigenous leader, and that's been a recent change that it was brought to the committee's attention that this opportunity to have an Indigenous co-chair, and I think it was an important development in the recent Arctic Science Summit that took place. So now it's Henry and Daley are both co-chairs of that, and they are, of course, working closely with Gerlis Funkman, who is the IASC secretary. So the partners that participating in the organizations are also listed here to the right. I mean, you could see the variety of partners, including several permanent participants, Indigenous Peoples organizations and the Arctic Council, scientific associations, funding associations, right? Research operators and other important parties. So all these representatives are a part of the International Steering Committee. Next slide. So the local organizing committee is here in front of you. It's Matthew, myself, and several other colleagues from the University of Colorado Boulder, who will closely work on organizing the meeting. Of course, we also work closely with Gerlis Funkman at the IASC Secretariat to make sure that the process is smooth, and we also, of course, learning a lot from our predecessors who just had the Arctic Science Summit Week in Edinburgh, Scotland. We also think that in a very short time, we will add additional members to support this committee, and maybe also to make sure that we include Indigenous representation from the Boulder area and from the Arctic on the committee. So, but that's a preliminary list of individuals who will work closely with us to establish the process for the summit in 2025.
Andrey, I think if I can go back, I think we skipped over a slide by accident here. Let me see if did we
we did not have that somehow. Yes, and that was of course, and I was referenced a little bit to it, but yeah, somehow it didn't appear. So there is, as I mentioned, the recent development and the Arctic Science Summit in 2024, just last month, was the addition of the Indigenous co-chair to the ICARP process, and that's resulted from an active initiative that has been going since fall of 2022, led by Dr. Daley Sambodoro, as well as Varvara Korkin-Williams from Dartmouth and Tatiana Degai from University of Victoria, the Indigenous scholars who initiated what is known as the Indigenizing Arctic Research Initiative, and they had multiple gatherings of Arctic Indigenous peoples, knowledge holders, community members across the Arctic over the last year and a half, which resulted in a letter that this group has sent to the International Steering Committee for ICARP, in which they outline the ways in which this committee and the process could be improved to incorporate Indigenous voices and ensure that the the process is inclusive and led by Indigenous peoples of the Arctic. So as a result of this, one of the steps was to make sure that Daley is the co-chair of the International Steering Committee. Also, that each of the or most of the working groups or the priority research teams have Indigenous representation and leadership. So, but the process is still going on, and I think we really hope that this group that closely works with other Indigenous organizations and groups would be an instrumental way in which brings Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous leadership into ICARP process. So we're really happy that that is taking place. I do need to say that the project is supported by the NSF, so it's in many ways US-led initiative, although it is circumpolar. So we're really pleased that has taken place. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Andrey. I think we now are passing it on to April.
Thanks, Matt. So as Andrey had mentioned, our third level of committee in planning, the ICARP Summit and ASSW 2025 is our national steering group. So I'm not going to read all the names here, but we have about 30 folks that we're working with that bring a broad range of expertise and experiences related to Arctic research that are helping in thinking about the agenda for the ASSW meeting, as well as providing other guidance on meeting planning and various outreach that we're trying to do here. Next slide, please, Matt. So as both Matthew and Andrey have noted, we are turning our thinking now to ASSW 2025, now that 2024 just happened. The science symposium portion of ASSW in 2025 will be focused on ICARP. In addition to that, there will be the typical meetings that you would have in terms of side meetings, community meetings, topical workshops, other special events, but kind of the science symposium focus will be around ICARP. And this will become much more public facing on the ASSW website very soon. They are in the process of transitioning the website over from 2024 to 2025. So later this month, we'll start promoting a call for session topics and community and business meetings. And we'll be encouraging you all to think about what you may want to suggest for this meeting. And then later on in the summer, we'll have a call for abstracts, with the public agenda being released later in the fall, and then opening registration towards the end of the year. So kind of things are going to get going really quickly, and all the organizing committees are really starting to go much faster now. Next slide, please, Matthew. So as we've heard on earlier slides, but we just wanted to reinforce here that the ASSW 2025 will really focus on the consultation on this draft of deliverables for ICARP. This is really the opportunity for the broader community to weigh in on these priorities and start to think about the outcomes that could come out of this priority setting exercise. And I'll return to that in a few minutes. This also is intended to try to reach really a much broader audience of researchers as well as other interested parties on Arctic issues, and thinking about user communities that may be able to take what's included in this priority setting activity and use it for decision-making, research goals, and other activities. And this ties in, as we've mentioned previously, to the much longer view of thinking about IPY, or the fifth International Polar Year that will take place in 2032 and 2033. Next slide, please, Matt. So just to step back a little bit on the International Polar Year, this was a new concept to me, having not been quite into Arctic research 25 years ago or 20 years ago. So International Polar Years have a long history. We're now on the fifth. And they are designed to galvanize the research community and funding opportunities around internationally coordinated research, where we have many researchers observing and monitoring and doing analysis to address similar types of issues around the polar regions, and using it as a way to make a step change in our understanding of the polar regions and how they interact with the rest of the Earth. So the last IPY that was held was in 2007 and 2008. There were 228 international projects that came out of that work and involved 60 nations with tens of thousands of researchers and participants in that effort. And a product from that has been a strengthening of the partnership between IASC and SCAR. And IASC and SCAR were lead. SCAR is the IASC equivalent, the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, so the equivalent to the Arctic side. And IASC and SCAR are leads in thinking about IPY 5, which is coming up. So next slide, please, Matt. So late last year, there was a concept note that was released, kind of setting a high-level vision for what could be undertaken in IPY 5. The link is here at the bottom of the screen. And this is just kind of meant to start the discussion about potential priority areas. And I think we really have an opportunity here with ICARP to think about how it fits within this broader vision and how we can help support reaching this vision. And this includes a lot of thinking about knowledge systems and Indigenous engagement as well, which I think really fits in with how we're seeing the ICARP leadership and thinking around the ICARP process evolving. Next slide. So just want to pause here on this slide, thinking about outcomes and products of ICARP IV. I think that the community that is leading this effort and thinking about it is really focused on trying to identify what the outcomes may be. So here, some of the areas that are actively in discussion now are things like identifying the critical research needs and gaps and ideas, but also how do we make research be able to better support decision-making, specific and shared funding priorities that can be really deeply ingrained in this process and in the priorities, formalizing and institutionalizing how Indigenous peoples are involved in leading in research and planning and implementation, and setting up coordinated research plans for international cooperation. So really want to have some very clear outcomes of this process, and ones that will be able to see the impact and see how these priorities really will inform research in the next decade for the Arctic region, as well as tying into this broader polar effort that we have coming up. And I'm hoping we can spend some time hearing from you all during the discussion about areas that you see could be valuable outcomes that could drive how these priorities are taking shape. I think there's one more slide, or maybe two. Yes, so just wanted to acknowledge that the National Science Foundation is the primary sponsor for IASC, and we all appreciate their continued support for these efforts. I think we'll now open it up to questions.
Thank you, April, Matthew, and Andrey, for a great presentation and a great overview of the ICARP IV process. If you've got questions for the presenters or input based on, maybe Matt, if you want to go back to the previous slide real quick, just so folks can get a sense of where you're looking for input. You can put them in the chat, put your input or your questions in the chat. You can also raise your hand. It's under reactions on the Zoom toolbar. You can also, if you want to ask a question anonymously, just chat me directly and I will ask it on your behalf.
And as people might be thinking about questions, I think the trigger on my keyboard's pretty sensitive. We skipped over this slide, which is simply just to give a quick preview of the ICARP IV website with the address there at the bottom. This has the majority of information for the topics that we discussed, including the composition of the International Steering Committee, more details about the research priority teams. So I wanted to make sure that everyone had access to that.
We have a question from Beth Leonard asking if there are reports from the working groups that will be available on the website.
So as Andrea had laid out, the research priority teams will be really at the peak of their drafting phase in the fall when they have a joint co-chairs workshop. I'm not sure exactly when after that the drafts that will serve as the foundation for consultation that we want to see happen at the ICARP IV Summit. I'm not sure when those drafts will actually be available, but I do suspect that those would be posted on that ICARP IV website, and I anticipate that those are materials that will be very much kind of advertised, both in the context of the ICARP IV process as a whole, but also as a way to get people interested in coming to ASSW 2025. So we'll do our best to make sure that folks are informed through various channels of when those drafts become available. But I just will stress that when those do become publicly available, they will just be early drafts. They're not going to be the final products.
Thank you. I see a hand up from Keith Alberson. You can take yourself off mute.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I turned on video too. Anyway, you can hear me. I'm the director of WCRP Click these days, which is based at UMass Amherst as of this year. We are very happy to be involved. I think one of our co-chairs, Amy Lovecraft, is on your ICARP steering committee, and in terms of IPY, the other co-chair, Ed Hanna, has been involved together with other partners in that concept note. The question I have is, well, I think it was answered in the talks, but we're thinking about possibly holding our CLIC Scientific Steering Committee meeting in 2025 in Boulder alongside ASSW. And I gathered from the presentations that the website will be updated and have some ability for groups to register they're interested in business meetings or that nature. If someone could correct me if I'm wrong, otherwise I look forward to possibly holding our CLIC Scientific Steering Committee meeting alongside ASSW in Boulder, and encouraging all of our members to cooperate with the ICARP IV planning process. Thank you.
Yeah, I can briefly say, Keith, that your understanding is correct. As April mentioned, the ASSW website, the address doesn't change from year to year. It's just updated to reflect the next ASSW. That updating for ASSW 2025 is happening now, and the call for both community and side meetings, as well as for session abstracts, will be going live at the end of April, potentially early May, but I think we're aiming for late April to have that call out, and it'll be a simple, probably a Google form in which groups like CLIC can propose to have a side meeting, whether it be a workshop, a special event, or a more of a business meeting. Those are all well suited for ASSW, and that call will stay open so the call for sessions will stay open through late July. The call for side events will stay open through late September. So there'll be plenty of time to get those expressions of need in there, so that we can properly plan for all those side events.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Don Morales asking how the various ICARPs are integrated. For example, does the fourth one, is ICARP 4 interrelated with ICARP 3, 2, and 1?
I'll maybe look to Andrey to answer that, but just a clarification, Don, are you talking about how the research priority teams will be integrated, or how the 4 different ICARPs that have taken place since 1995 would be integrated? So the research priority teams. Andrey, did you want to speak to that about the integration of the research priority teams?
Yes. I guess I could speak on both accounts, right? So in terms of RPTs, there are several, I guess, mechanisms that are embedded in them. First, one is the co-chairs mechanism. So all co-chairs are working collectively, right? They work with their RPTs, but also they have their own meetings. And as I mentioned, in October, there will be a meeting of all co-chairs in Akureyri with the International Steering Committee. So that's where they have an opportunity to coordinate their messages and work. But they are, as I know, they work already across different RPTs to see how that how they steer their processes forward and what they're doing, and making sure that if there are areas of overlap, these are noted and addressed. The other mechanism is, and we have some overlapping memberships as well in some of the groups, so that's important. One of the very important notions that came from the first in-person meetings is that, for example, Indigenous representatives, each of the working groups are agreed and interested in working together with the RPT number 5, which is specifically focused on knowledge co-production, Indigenous-led research. So that's to make sure that component is present in every group and is coordinated to make sure that we have the maximum impact. So there are several mechanisms, I guess, that are there as well. I know maybe Matt, you have anything to add?
Well, I would just say that as Andrey described, the research priority teams are quite large, and they're very international. So it has, I think, been a pretty substantial lift for the co-chairs to get these teams up and going, and to have a balance of imparting structure versus allowing a bit of a inclusive bottom-up process within those teams to emerge. And so I think it was recognized at the research priority team meetings at ASSW 2024 that there is increasing need to really create some through lines of consistency across how those research priority teams are working, so that they don't all end up with very different looking products in the end. But that process is ongoing.
Thank you. And I'll remind folks, again, you can put questions and comments in the chat. You can also raise your hand. And I am available if you want to ask a question without having your name attached to it. I'll also note that I've been putting links in the chat throughout the presentation, and those will get added to the event page as well. So if you need to reference anything later, that'll all be available for you.
I guess maybe in the meantime, I could just say a few words about the other version of the question, how the ICARPs are connected. I think ICARP 4 has made a concerted effort to have a connection with at least ICARP 3. Even the formulation of the research priority teams was taken from the documents that ICARP 3 developed. So we do think there's a strong connection, and they may change. Of course, the priorities will change, likely, but at least the starting points were embedded in the ICARP 3 process and ICARP 3 outcomes. I think that was good. In addition to that, as Matt mentioned, there's a study going on by Jenny Baseman and on behalf of IASC, looking at the impacts of ICARP 3 and what we can learn from that to ensure that ICARP 4 is successful. I was a part of ICARP 3 process. I think in terms of relying on ICARP 2, there were more, less coordinated efforts, but still, we have done, at least myself personally, we have done analysis of ICARP 2 documents to inform us in ICARP 3 priorities. Again, there were no research priority teams as such at the time. Now I think it's more kind of more organized process, but still, I think that there was a process to bring in the previous ICARPs. Now, whether we could do better or more, I think we can. And as I said, ICARP 4 is trying it to make sure that we sort of don't start from scratch or don't learn the lessons from previous ICARPs. but I think we do have a reasonable process that would ensure that.
Thank you, Andrey. I will put out one last call for questions or comments.
Liz, if I may also add that
Please.
so Andrey, myself, and April, and perhaps others from our national steering group in the future are interested in using ICARP collaborations as a key way of engaging with audiences like we have today. And so we're hoping to have approximately some bi-monthly webinars and lead up to ASSW 2025 in March of next year to present various topics that are central to the ICARP IV process. For example, we may have webinars that are focused on the topics of those different research priority teams. I'm hoping we might be able to hear more about the indigenizing Arctic research planning process that Andrey mentioned. And so we don't have a full program for those upcoming webinars yet. We're going to be working towards that. And certainly along those lines, your suggestions or thoughts on things that you would like to hear about would be very helpful. And in addition to the webinars, we'll also be posting some regular updates about the work that's going on within ICARP IV, and also pointing to the regular circulars that IASC and ASSW put out and lead up to the meeting as well. So please stay tuned to IARPC as a key way to stay informed on ICARP. It's difficult to keep these acronyms straight, so if we can accomplish that, we'll be on a better foot.
Yeah, and I will clarify for folks. Yeah, so IARPC, the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee, who's hosting this webinar, is a forum for folks to share information. So if you don't have an account, you can request one at the link I'm dropping in the chat right now. And if you do have an account, or once you sign up for one, you can go to the Teams page, and if you scroll down under Communities of Practice, you will see that there is a team for the U.S. Forum for the International Arctic Science Committee, which is IASC. So if you join that team, you'll get information from Matthew and others about the ICARP process and about the different meetings and webinars that he just referenced. So I also earlier in the chat did throw the link in to IARPC's acronym glossary, which I will do one more time for folks, because I don't know about the rest of you, but my head starts spinning with all of the acronyms that are almost identical. So that can be handy. And with that, Matthew, is there anything else you or Andrey or April would like to share with the group?
Well, I would just say I always like hearing from people directly. And so I think everyone should be able, if you're on IARPC collaboration, should be able to find me and message me directly if you have any suggestions or thoughts or even some critical ideas of what we're trying to do. I'd be happy to hear from you. And I'll also drop my email here in the chat in case anyone wants to write to me afterwards.
Yeah, and same here, of course, but I would like everyone to mark their date for March of 2025 and get their stuff going for the Arctic Science Summit and ICARP Summit and Boulder.
Great. And on behalf of IARPC, I will say thank you to the entire IASC and ICARP team for such a great webinar. Thank you, April, Matthew, and Andrey, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. I dropped in the chat as well. The recording of this webinar will be posted on the event page and on our YouTube. So if you missed part of it or want to share it with someone else, you can find it there within the next couple of days. So thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.